Thank you. Good afternoon. Um, it's probably a good advantage for me to go first because I'm sure I'll make several mistakes, and I've got some pretty smart people coming after me who can clean things up. And I want to say one personal note before we start, and that is thanks to all of you for helping to save lives, mine included. So what I begin with on the vocational side is we all know we had a pretty big backlog of cases before all this started. There was every expectation somewhere after this started for the cases to move forward in some way. So I want to speak to what this might mean in the vocational area. I think there's several of you, maybe most of you, who know what your client is in for when you send them for a vocational evaluation. If it's okay, I'll take a minute to run through the basics for people who it's been a while or if they haven't done this yet. The webinar is probably going to have a wider audience than we have currently. So the basic thing to describe is to act as though I'm speaking to an attorney over the phone, like happened forever. When a worker comes into a vocational eval, what they're going to find is they're going to sit in an office all morning and all afternoon for 2 straight days. They'll probably be interviewed for 1 or 2 or 3 or more hours, some point along there. Fill out a lot of questionnaires and take paper and pencil tests. That's the general model. Not all vocational practitioners follow that model exactly. And some evaluations take less time, some take more. It really depends on the client's situation. As a general idea for looking at vocational evaluations, think of this. The standard of practice in the vocational world basically would be guided by how would a potential employer look at your client, current situation. There's a general standard of practice in the vocational field that calls for an opinion on vocational suitability to include several factors that would make up a decision that an employer would probably make. One of the areas is vocational interests. The general idea is that employers want, when they hire someone, they want someone to stay with them and not take some other job because they're interested in something else. That's been looked at for years by the vocational field, and I think most of you are familiar with that already. An important issue for injured clients and clients with major illnesses is how does that worker cope with pain? If their pain hasn't gone completely away, what are they doing to manage it? How much is that going to make sense in an employment setting? Another major area is employment readiness and to deal with the question of retraining if it might be needed. For most employers, a key element is how does the worker actually cope with any ongoing functional restrictions? In a concrete sense is, the employer, will I have to make accommodations in the workplace in order for the person to be successful? Another standard element that's looked at, a factor, is what's the person's current vocational skill level? It might not have changed, it might have changed. A current assessment's usually needed, not always, but usually needed to take a look at that issue. The next area is that there's a recognition that injuries and rehabilitation work are inherently stressful. So one issue that needs to be at least considered is how is the worker coping on an emotional or personality basis with what they have to do to go back to work. In vocational evaluations, generally a follow-up is needed on one or more areas. This is work that's done after the worker's appointment with the vocational person. Could be collateral interviews, employment verification, that kind of thing. And the last element to highlight is in your work, I think you'll agree that it's usually somewhat of a moving target with respect to when is the right time for a vocational report to be completed. From my standpoint, in an ideal world, I would go last. I'd have all the information that everybody else has been looking at, and then make myself try to think like an employer and look at the situation for that client. So what can we do? What options are even reasonable now? What might be allowed? So I will say that I'm a psychologist and I'm governed by the rules and regulations of my profession, the College of Alberta Psychologists. Not all vocational assessments are done by psychologists. Nurses do them. There are lots of other professions that do them. So I can only speak to what I know. Presently, and it's been this way for a long time, the psychology profession has standards and ethics that require if a psychologist is going to give an opinion that it be based on a direct examination with the client, review of records, and similar activities where you're asked to try to provide an opinion are just not a good idea. It's not likely to work. How do we do that? The current regulations and guidance from the College of Alberta Psychologists, they're available for anybody to look up if you just go to their website. And in brief, what they say is that psychologists are considered essential workers, whether that applies to a legal setting is a debatable matter, but at least it starts out that way. The guidance is strongly, though, to consider how to do whatever you need to do to help your client within the general guidelines for managing the COVID-19 outbreak. One thing that I've already done, and I'm sure other people have done, is to try to do this work, at least in some part, through video conferencing, some kind of virtual environment. So there are some advantages. One of the most important ones is that the consideration of what the timeline is running in the background for your work with your client and for the client himself or herself. Using a vocational platform with video conferencing has some advantages in the sense of dealing with the time issues. Probably the most cumbersome thing for your client is to stop what they're doing for 2 straight days and come in for an appointment. It may not even be in the city or town where they live. Is mostly, I think it's a general rule, it's going to be hard to do any kind of multi-hour, 3-4 hour kind of video conferencing. I just haven't found that it's feasible other than in urgent situations where there's just no choice. So in short, using a virtual platform may give more flexibility and move up the timeline to some degree with respect to getting your client scheduled and getting the vocational assessment done. It's really the basic thing is it's easier to start early if you have that option. Another thing that really needs to be repeated in several different kind of contexts is that the demands of a vocational evaluation in this setting is going to require more active effort from the client in most cases. Um, the elements that we're all dealing with right now in doing this webinar often completely new to some of your clients. Disadvantages are if you don't do it in an in-office setting, we don't get the advantage of working with the client for 2 straight days and seeing what effect the whole process has on how they cope. Obviously, there's a problem for some clients in that they won't have the kind of equipment, IT equipment that will work. There are probably other solutions that are going to prove practical for a few of those clients in the sense of helping them directly with that, or having them go to a location where it's more possible. For psychologists, there's a problem with the materials that the clients work with. Many of them are copyrighted or under control for they're not supposed to be exposed to the general public, so that they still work. So far, looks like that if the client's vision and computer, their own personal vision and their computer skills are good enough, many of those can be done over the computer. Obviously, there are potential distractions. It's really not the optimal administration for some activities. So it probably will end up that the vocational evaluator will need to meet directly with the client, at least for a shorter amount of time. I'm estimating now probably an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. Otherwise, it's really a matter of the computer literacy of the client. So it's not going to work in some cases. And frankly, individual clients' needs are so different that we'll just have to find out together to what degree this will really work. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'll take questions later if you have them. Thank you.